Hello students, welcome to COM308 week 2. This week we will be discussing concepts related to self and perception within the course content. If you look towards our week 2 agenda, you can see here some of the things that we do have going on. We are reading chapter 2 and 3, located between pages 34 and 87 within our Gamble and Gamble text. So it's very important that you get through that content to fully understand each of the things that are required this week within the course content. We have 5 videos that we are watching. Most of those videos are short. The TED Talks are about 10 to 15 minutes each in length. The other 3 are under 5 minutes each. What they're designed to do is just to enhance our understanding and give us some extra instruction on the concepts that we're reviewing this week, which happen to be the self and perception and what that means in terms of our interpersonal communication attempts. So when we look at that, there are a couple theories, Gestalt's principles and Irving Goffman's dramaturgical approach to human interaction that kind of enhance some of the theories that I'm going to highlight within this lecture and found within the text to help broaden your horizons and your ideas about interpersonal communication. The TED Talks really kind of deal with first Sandy Newton's talks about how she learned to embrace herself and otherness in being being a person that's biracial, and so that was really interesting to kind of look at her perspective of that and trying to determine who she is, what her perception of herself is, and how she identifies with very different cultures on a daily basis. The second one at TED Talk is how do you define yourself, really starts to deal with the concepts in chapter 3 about perception, and so that's really where that one identifies with it. You also have a discussion board post. Remember, the original posts are due by Friday. The second posts, your replies, are all due by Sunday. In that discussion board post, you will be also watching a video from Sandals Church that talks about perception and biblical perception and things of that nature to kind of tie in some faith integration, but not only that, to help us kind of understand some of these biblical concepts in terms of worldview and how it relates to our interpersonal communication with one another, and we'll get into that in more details in a little bit. Just some general reminders. You also have a theory review paper number 1, which I'm going to explain as soon as I'm done going through all of this agenda information. Just some general reminders, all of your original posts for your discussion boards are due by Friday. The replies are all due by Sunday, and those are firm deadlines. I know last week was week 1. We're trying to get to know each other, get in there and start to understand some course content and things of that nature, but deadlines are firm. There's very little wiggle room. As you know, per the syllabus, there is no late work that's accepted. So if you do have something that comes up or is unforeseen, let me know ahead of time. We'll amend the deadline so it's not turned in late in some way or another. And what I mean by that really is that we'll amend the deadline if you know you're not going to be here in week 4, you're going to be traveling, technology is going to be an issue. Then if we meet ahead of time, we'll find an alternative deadline prior to the week 4 deadline for you to get that in before you travel, so that way you don't have to worry about any of those things. I will be going through all of your assignments in the coming days. Remember, turnaround time is about 3 to 4 days, so be anticipating the gradebook to be updated towards the end of this week. If you have any specific questions with the course content and a grade, feel free to contact me. Also review the week 1 lecture where that tells you how to access your grades, and it shows you how to click on the link to show instructor feedback and things of that nature. And just to kind of make a note of that as well. Also, just to kind of broaden our horizons with some of that, I generally make a rule not to give extensive feedback on assignments where students score greater than 80%. So if you get 80% or higher, you're in that A to B range for your grade on a particular assignment, you'll notice that it'll be minimal feedback. That's because you scored above average or excellent on the assignment. So feedback really isn't needed because there's very little for you to improve. However, if you notice that you're scoring in those high areas and you're like, I really want to bump up from an 85 to a 95, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll give you some more detailed and poignant feedback to let you know what you should do on that end. But just keep that in mind. If you score under 80%, you will see some detailed feedback. That's really where we're kind of in that red zone where I need to kind of help you elevate yourself to get to the next level and provide you with feedback that will help you do that throughout the course. Discussion board 2 asks you to watch a sermon from Sandals Church. The link is provided below, obviously, and this is a video, but if you were in Blackboard, the link will click to the Sandals Church video. The sermon, it's about a half hour. The sermon's about list, loophole, or lifestyle. And it talks about perceptions and biblical interpretation and perception of biblical callings and living a Christian life and things of that nature. So you'll need to answer the 3 questions posed here. The first question, really, I want you to start thinking about how, when you think Christianly, meaning when you apply biblical word and Christian worldview to your life, how does that shape a person's perception? Provide some examples from the text and the video that support your argument. So when you think about living as a Christian, how does that shape a person's perception? That's number 1. And number 2, the video really gives us an example about Facebook. What are some of the perceptions one might have when posting on Facebook? How can we do this to think Christianly, but most importantly, how might their posting differ based on a Christian worldview versus a secular worldview? So keep that in mind. And then 3, give an example of how living a life according to biblical principles, so the way God has called us to live, may influence our perception about societal norms and customs. Also, how can Christians remain influential while embracing perceptions about others in life and society? So when we interpret biblical principles, how does that affect our perception of the world, meaning our societal norms, what society tells us to live, and customs versus what the Bible tells us to live in customs? Your original post needs to be 300 words total. That means after answering all 3 questions, it should be about 300 words, not 300 words per question. And your reply post should be 150 words minimum each to each person, and you are required to reply to at least 2 students. The theory review papers are designed for you to spend time, a little more detailed time, in looking at some of the theories from the chapters assigned in a given week. We have more than one of these due throughout the semester. The format doesn't really change in terms of what you need to address. However, sometimes the format and how you deliver the assignment does change. So this week you're writing a paper. Next time you have one, you may be presenting it in a Prezi or things of that nature. But the overall concepts of what you should include in your response will not change at all. You do have to submit this to Safe Assign. It automatically will do that for you when you upload it to Blackboard. But do review your Safe Assign originality report, because if it's greater than 20%, it will not be graded. So please keep note of that. If you've done everything right and your sourcing is correct, your citations are correct, and there's nothing there that's incorrect, and it tells you your Safe Assign is over 20%, it's probably because you have too many direct quotes and you should go back and paraphrase some things. However, I will make a note of that, and if I see that you cited everything correctly, then it's fine. But really what you need to do is go through the chapter and look at some of the theories that are there and determine what you'd like to look deeper at. We're going to review some of them in the lecture today. We're going to look at reflected appraisal theory, social comparison theory, we're going to look at some perception theories, and then you're going to watch some videos on theories, Gestalt's principles, and Irving Gotham's dramaturgical analysis of human perception theory. So you're going to get 4 just by looking at the lecture there that you could choose from if you'd like, but there are more in the Gamble and Gamble text. And so what I want you to do is go beyond the text and look at this theory and figure out why you think this relates to interpersonal communication. Why is it important in the course content? Yes, but what do you think about it? I want you to start to develop your own ideas about this particular theory. We're going to do this 4 times within the semester, so we'll become pretty routine. But in your response, you need to include 3 things. There's 3 areas you need to cover, and each area should make up a third of your response. So since this response is 2 to 3 pages in length, it's easy to know that concept 1 should probably be about a page, and concept 2 should be about a page, and concept 3 about a page. The first thing you're going to include in your response is a review of the major concepts and elements of the theory as found in the article or book that you read. So remember, you can use the textbook for this, but you also need to include 2 additional outside sources about the course content. I mean, besides the course content. So when you look at this and you've decided, for example, you're going to look at uncertainty reduction theory, which is something we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. You've read what Gamble and Gamble has to say, you Googled it and you found some scholarly or academic source that supports it, and you found a video example on YouTube. Those are your 3 sources. Now I want you to explain to me your number 1 should review the major concepts and elements of the theories, explain it to me or write it in a way so that I can understand what it is, assuming I have no knowledge of what the particular theory may have. Number 2 asks you to analyze it. You need to analyze the strengths and the weaknesses of the theory. So now you've already set up an introduction. You've explained to me what I need to know about the particular theory, its elements, major concepts, things of that nature that make it fit within interpersonal communication. 2, now you're going to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the theories based on the information that you read. So the sources you found, use the power of reason and logic to tell me what you think the strengths are and what you think the weaknesses are of the theory. Remember, this is what you think the strengths or the weaknesses are. You're supporting it based off the information that you read. So if you've read in 2 of the 3 sources that a weakness is whatever the weakness is, then you can say that because you have some textual support to back you up. 3 is you need to now comment on how this theory in the books and things of that integrate into what you already know and what you're learning about interpersonal communication and communication theory in a sense. So we're kind of integrating here what this theory tells us and how it integrates firmly into the course content. That's really, really important to understand from that perspective. So as we get into that, it's really important to know that. So those are the 3 things you're doing. One, you're reviewing the theory, you're explaining it to the reader. 2, you're analyzing the strengths and the weaknesses. And then 3, you're talking about how it relates to interpersonal communication. It's really to give the reader, the person looking at your review, a firm understanding of what you think the theory is, and helping us, the reader, to understand how it relates to the course content. What is this going to do for you? It's going to help you in the end when you get to your critical assignment in week 8. You'll have 4 theories that you've reviewed. So when you get to the critical assignment portion, and we'll discuss that later, you'll be able to see, okay, that makes sense. This is where I'm at with whatever it may be. Or I have my 4 theories that I've already researched, so now I can just firmly integrate those into my critical assignment or even your midterm when you finish doing your self-reflections and things of that nature to determine what it is, what something is. So the next thing is reflected appraisal theory. This was developed by Cooley, and what Cooley tells us within this theory is that the self we present is based on many factors. This is actually firmly in line with a lot of what Goffman tells us about his dramaturgical analysis, which you'll watch if you have not watched already. But Cooley tells us that the way we present ourselves is based on 3 factors: the way others categorize us, the roles they expect us to play, and the behaviors or traits they expect us to exhibit. So the self we present is based off of 1, how we feel people categorize us. So if I'm in a given situation, if I'm at work, I know people are going to categorize me as a faculty member, a professor, so on and so forth. If I'm at home, or I'm at my son's football practice, I'm going to be categorized as a mom, as his mom. So I'm not going to have my work hat on. And so what Cooley tells us is that the self we present is based off of the first thing, the way others categorize us within a situation. 2, the roles they expect us to play. So if somebody expects me to be the parent at a football practice, they have certain roles and expectations that I'll adhere to at the practice, correct? Or if I'm at work, I have certain roles and expectations they expect me to adhere to when I'm at work. This third thing is the behaviors or traits they expect us to exhibit, and that is dependent on the first 2, the way they categorize us, and 2, the role they expect us to play. Our behaviors or traits will exhibit the other 2 things. So the way I react, the way I act, the way I present myself, my behaviors, especially my communicative behaviors, will relate to the way I'm categorized in a given situation and the role they expect us to play. Goffman's dramaturgical analysis tells us that we do this as well, and we present our best self as the world wants us to be presented. It goes a lot with Shakespeare's ideas of the world is a theater and we are mere actors playing a role. That's what Goffman gets into, more of that. The acting and how our communication affects the acting and the perception and the self we present on that. Slightly different than Cooley, but they're very, very related. So if we build a self-concept based on how others think of us, we tend to have a looking glass self. This is representative that the self comes to us from others. And so when we get into how we view ourselves and our self-esteem, it's very dependent on this looking glass self. How do people view me at work? How am I viewed at home? How am I viewed in my social life? And things of that nature. And so that's just some highlights for you to kind of make some delineation between what that theory is and introducing Goffman as well. Social comparison theory tells us that we consistently compare ourselves to others to develop a feel for how our talents, abilities, and qualities measure up. It's kind of that idea of keeping up with the Joneses. So if we're in a neighborhood and we're constantly comparing ourselves to our neighbors, we may constantly think, oh, we're not good enough, or we need to do this, or we need to update our backyard in order to keep up, and how our qualities measure up with one another's. We use this as a comparison to evaluate ourselves. We also can tend to form judgments of our skills or our personal characteristics when we compare it to other people. And so this social comparison theory really directly relates more to yourself and your self-perception and your self-esteem than anything else. Our interpersonal communication tends to be affected by this in the way that we form judgments of our skills and our personal characteristics when we compare it to somebody else. So I know if I'm sitting there with a lawyer, I may not talk about the law as much because I'm going to feel inadequate about that because I know that person's skills and personal characteristics as far exceeds mine. And so it has to do a lot with things of that nature. It also tells us in social comparison theory that we make decisions about the groups we fit and comfortable interacting with those who we perceived to be more like us. So we tend to flock towards those that we feel fit our ideals and our skills and our judgments and our qualities to have deep interpersonal connections with, rather than those that we feel that do not view that. Good. So the next thing we're going to look at are some perception theories. The first one we're going to look at is standpoint theory. Standpoint theory really concerns with the various levels of people's perceptions. So for instance, people have similarity in their opinion depending on their demographic, their living areas, their culture, things of that nature, and it concerns mostly general issues. The most influential factor that regulates a perception is through experience. So the tradition, the culture also shapes person's perceptions to a certain degree, but one of the basic factors for altering perception is the socioeconomic status in society, geographical location, as well as the person's socioeconomic position in society. So this is the kind of job a person has, the basic gender differences, cultural differences, and things like that really tells us how those in power want to perceive social hierarchy, but really plays an influence in standpoint theory in terms of people's various levels of perception. So in standpoint theory, it tells us that a viewpoint or an attitude towards a particular issue comes from somebody's own personal perspective called a standpoint. So if you grew up in a certain socioeconomic status, perhaps you came from a very affluent background, or you came from a background that maybe was not as affluent. Were very low income. That can affect your standpoint on issues. So the way you view education, college education, may not be viewed the same as somebody that came from a background that was more affluent. If you knew it was just great to graduate high school and get a full-time job, you may not think very highly of college. If you came from a more affluent background where you had people in your family that were very highly educated, your standpoint would be a little different. So standpoint theory deals with perception. Your standpoint, your view, your position on a topic comes from your background, the way you were raised, your cultural influences, the biblical influences, socioeconomic status, your demographical information, things of that nature. So if I knew I was raised in Southern California and I experienced this in my life, I may have a very different perspective from somebody that lived in the South. And so keep that in mind. These views develop throughout your life and are likely to be more distorted than a person who stands to gain little from their position in social hierarchy. So it's really, really important that when you consider this, your position within society really becomes marginalized and changes your standpoint based off of your experience. And that's really important to keep in mind. The next one is uncertainty reduction theory. This really rests on a lot of basic assumptions. Primarily, we're monitoring social environment to learn more about one another. We're seeking information about each other because we lack knowledge. And what really happens with this is that I had it listed here. Who was Berger and Calabrese really described 3 stages of communication which uncertainty reduction exists, and it really happens. And what happens with uncertainty reduction theory is really a form of cognitive dissonance. Leon Festinger developed cognitive dissonance, saying that when we feel uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable about a situation, our communication is reactive or proactive to reduce that dissonance, that uncomfortable feeling. And so what Berger and Calabrese did is they came up with uncertainty reduction theory to tell us that there are 3 stages of communication in which we advance through when we're experiencing this uncertainty on a particular standpoint or perception within life. And remember, perception just is how we view something, but it's also how we communicatively view something. So the first thing is entry. Individuals exchange demographic information such as their gender, things in their age, occupation, things of that nature, and communication typically follows general social rules and norms. 2 is personal. Communication begins to share more personal data, attitudes, beliefs about topics, talking more about your personal life, kids, things of that nature. And communication is less constrained by social norms. You start to develop this interpersonal connection, and that uncertainty is reduced. And then 3 is the exit. When communicators decide whether they will interact in future or continue a relationship, and that's when the interaction will end. So a good example of this is if you stop to have coffee and you run into somebody and you start chit-chatting and you get past the entry stage of just exchanging general formalities of who you are, where you live, things of that nature, and then you get into this personal where you begin talking about your lives more, and then you know what, coffee's over and you have to make a decision. Are you going to pursue a friendship, or is that going to end there? So your uncertainty about a person or developing an interpersonal interaction with somebody is reduced throughout the more communication that you have, and it has as you progress through these 3 stages. And that's what that particular theory is. And so as we go through this, it's important to keep those in mind. Let's briefly go back to our week 2 agenda, just recap. There are more theories in the reading than what I laid out here to explain to you, but most importantly, go through the chapters, determine what you want to look at. If you're unsure about how to pursue a theory, contact me as soon as possible so we can help you along the way there. Watch the videos and then complete discussion board number 2, your original post by Friday, the replies by Sunday, and post your theory review paper no later than Sunday night. I pray you all have a blessed week, and I look forward to interacting with you this week. And let me know if you need anything, as I'm here for you.